What's up, Covalence friends? Today we're going to be going over some scary JavaScript functions called bind, call, and apply. Some of you have probably seen them, a lot of you have probably heard of them, and some of you have maybe even used them before. But today we're going to be not only kind of describing what they do, but also trying to go through some real-world examples where I've actually used them in this way before, and maybe kind of give you some inspiration as to how you could use them in your code and make your code maybe a little bit cleaner or better. So let's get right into it. All right, so let's go ahead and create our index.html, and we're going to go ahead and make our index.js as well. All right, so in our index.html, we're going to stub it out, and we're going to do bind, call, apply. And in our body, we're going to go ahead and create our script tag and pass in index.js as the source. And in our JavaScript file, we're going to create an immediately executed function. All right, so when we're talking about bind, call, and apply, these are all functions that exist on JavaScript functions, right? And so any function can actually call bind, call, or apply. And what they're mainly for, it's mainly for setting context, right? So when you say this dot something in a function, you are referring to the context of the function itself, right? And so if you want to manipulate this value, that's when you can start using bind, call, and apply. Now, bind allows you to bind the context as well as arguments. Call allows you to bind the context plus pass in arguments. And apply does the same thing as call, except you're passing in an array as your arguments as opposed to just individual arguments. And so we'll go through an example of each, and we'll try and use an example that kind of makes sense for real world use, I guess you could say. Maybe they're a little far-fetched, but again, I feel like these are kind of examples that might pop up in the real world and when you're actually coding yourself. And so for bind can exist for a number of reasons. If you wanted to do function currying, bind is actually used quite a bit. And by function currying, I mean if you just want to take a function that would normally, let's just say function add, right? And you have A and B, and you return A plus B, right? But potentially you want to have just a function called add 5, let's just say, or add 10. That makes a little bit more. So function add 10, right? And it only takes in a single argument, right? And so instead of just saying like return 10 plus B, you can actually say const add 10 equals add.bind, null for this because we're not actually using this in this function, but you would then bind 10 as the first argument, right? So then we would call console.log add 10, and we'll say 20. So the result should be 30, right? So let's go ahead, pop this open, and you can see that we have 30, right? And so now you can actually go ahead and you can call this add 10 function multiple times, right? And you might be thinking, why would I ever want to do this? Well, the main reason you might want to do this is particularly if you have some function that you want to call ahead of time, or maybe this is some intensively computational value, right? So it'd be say you have another function that's function do a lot of work, right? And we're just going to return 10. But maybe this is actually something that's particularly computationally intensive, right? So then you call it do a lot of work here, and you bind that value to here, and now you're adding work. And then you call that, right? And you call that multiple times to these multiple values. Maybe these are individually computed as well, but you always know that this value itself is going to, exist, right? And again, it might not be adding. It might be something way more complex, right? So that's kind of where function currying would take, would kind of be one of the ways you wanted to handle that. But let's go ahead and look at another example real quick. So we're going to go ahead and just delete this. And we'll actually kind of work down here so that's always the top thing that's logged. And so let's create a class called person. And in this person, we're going to have a first name, and we're going to have a last name, And then we're going to have a constructor where we take in a first name and a last name. And then we're going to have a name function. So let's return this dot first name space this dot last name, right? All right, and then let's just say we have another class, wife, that extends person. And this constructor is actually going to take in a first name, a last name, but it's also going to take in a husband, right? And so we're going to go ahead and call super with F and L, but then we're going to say there's another property on wife called spouse name. Oops, this dot spouse name. Now, we want to set this to husband.name, right? Because that's the function. And we're passing in husband, and now we can call name. But this might look good in theory, right? Because it's the husband.name function. So you would think that it'd be calling that, you know, on the husband object itself, and we would actually get whatever value return. But let's go ahead and see what happens here. So if we create const h equals, you know, new person, and this is going to be, let's just use a figure from history here, William King. Then we have const w equals new wife, and we'll pass in Ada Lovelace, and we're going to pass in William King as her husband. Now if we log, you know, w.spouse name here, we're calling the function, you would think that we're going to get William King, right? Or at least that's the desired effect. That's what we want to get, is William King. But if we go ahead and log this real quick, we'll see that we actually get Ada Lovelace. Now this is a context value, right? The problem is that we're setting it equal to this function. Now this function does not keep this context. It doesn't know that husband is what you're actually referring to. It just knows that there's a function that returns this dot first name and this dot last name. But for this particular object now, the context is now this, which is now Ada Lovelace. So if we wanted to maintain that context, we actually have to use a dot bind, and we have to pass in husband. And now what this is doing is it's saying that it returns a new function where husband is the context and husband is the this value. So if we go ahead and run this again, we actually get William King now, which is the desired effect. And you'll see this used quite a bit in something like, well, I guess not so much anymore with React, but back when React used a bunch of classes, you saw this a lot. And actually, that's one of the reasons why React, I think, moved away from classes and more towards, you know, a little bit more functional programming and whatnot, and hooks and whatnot, because you would always have to do these binds almost like in a lot of different places to make, you know, to keep context and maintain the correct context. And so again, this is a pretty normal example that you might see in production code nowadays, right? And you would see something, you know, along this. You might actually see, you know, some dot binds inside the, you know, the JSX or the TSX if you're using React. And basically, all you're trying to do is you're trying to manipulate the value of this and make sure that this has the correct value, right, in the correct context for that function. All right, so that is. Leave that console.log up there. We'll take it out. So that would be, you know, an example of bind. Now call is a little bit different. Call allows us to also set this as well, and it's similar to bind in that you can pass in arguments afterwards. But the difference is that when you actually do a call, you're not actually returning a new function, right? You're actually calling the function, so you're getting the return value of that function. And so let's go ahead and create some DOM elements real quick. Let's just say div.block. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy this a bunch. So we're going to have a bunch of block elements, all right? All right, so we have 1, 2, 3. Let's just, you know, let's put some values in here. All right, so we have 10 blocks. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab these blocks. So let's just say const blocks equals document.get elements by class name, and we're going to pass in block, right? All right, so now what we want to do is we're going to log blocks real quick. All right, so blocks is this HTML collection. It's actually something called, I believe it's a node list, or maybe an HTML collection might be a type of node list, or a node list might be a type of HTML collection. But it has a length. What it doesn't have is it doesn't have array functions, right? And so even though it kind of looks like an array, and it kind of even has the brackets when you log it to the DOM, it doesn't have functions like push, right? So if I tried to do console.log, if I tried to do blocks.push, let's just say blocks.push, something, right? Typically you wouldn't want to push a string to this, but we're going to rerun this, and we're going to say that blocks.push is not a function, right? So it doesn't exist on here. But you may want to actually do something to this, right? So you may want to push something to this, you might want to push a new element, let's just say, to this list. Or you may want to just manipulate this, or splice it, slice it, do something along those lines, right? So what you can actually do is, instead of just grabbing blocks, we can do something along this line where we would actually do, let's just say const a blocks, should be like array blocks, equals array.prototype.slice.call blocks, right? Now what this is basically doing is it's basically doing blocks.slice, right? But slice doesn't exist on blocks. So what we're actually doing is we're passing in this node list into array.prototype.slice as this value, right? So now it's actually going to go through this node list, and it's going to create an array. So this call function is going to return an array because slice returns that, right? It's going to return an array of the entire subset, or the entire list of blocks. And we're actually going to have an array of those elements now. So if we go back in here and we call this again, we can actually see it doesn't say HTML collection anymore. It's actually an array of, an array type. So we have all of the array functions on here now, which makes it extremely useful. And now if we wanted to push something, we could say ablocks.push something. And when we run this now, we can actually see we have all the elements, and then we have that something at the end there, which makes no sense, I know. But again, extremely nice. And we now have that ability to run array functions on here. And now what we can see is the call function, we didn't pass in any arguments here, right? We just passed in the context itself. Now, if we wanted to grab a subset of that, and we didn't want to grab all of it, what we could do is we could do it all in one call. And we can say, let's say we want to grab the first two items. We can just say 1, 3, right? So now it's basically calling, this is basically the same thing as calling blocks.slice 1, 3, right? Although this doesn't exist yet. And now if we log a blocks, all right, we have the first two elements. Sorry, it's not, it's actually the second and the third element, right? Because we're starting at 1 and we're stopping at index 3, right? So if we look up the value of these, we can actually see that if we looked up text content, all right, instead of having a 1 in there, oh my gosh, so many properties. Oh, killing me. Text content is actually 2, right? So that first value is the 2. So we're actually grabbing these two elements, right? The 2 and the 3 here. So again, that's what actually doing the call and passing in values is. Now the apply is a similar function, right? In the sense that it's kind of the same. We can actually call apply here and have the exact same functionality. But instead of passing in 1 and 3, we would just pass in an array value. So it really only takes in 2 arguments. It takes in the context, and then it takes in all of the arguments that you're going to be passing in as a single argument, which is an array, right? So if we were to call this now, it would do the exact same thing. We get the exact same result, but let's just say we change this to be 2, 5, let's just say. Ran this. Now we're actually going to get, it's going to be 3, 4, 5, right? So this first one, if we go all the way down, we can actually see that the first value has the text content 3 in it. And another example of using apply that I tend to kind of run across quite a bit is with something like a splice function, right? So instead of slice, if we wanted to actually do a splice and we wanted to add stuff in the middle of it, let's just say, let's not worry about DOM elements for now. Let's just do, I don't know, let's create two arrays real quick. So we're going to do const, let's say R1 equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then const R2 equals 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, right? All right, so if we wanted to kind of merge these values together, right? And we wanted to basically place this right in the middle of this function here. Let's just say we wanted to go 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 4, 5, right? If for whatever reason you need to do that, then what we could do is we could slice this value, we could concatenate this value, and then we could slice this value and concatenate that value to the new value there, right? So it's a multi-step process. A much simpler way of doing that would be to just use splice and to use the apply function here, right? And so what we can say is that we can say R1 dot splice dot apply, right? And we're going to actually pass in R1 as the value itself, right? Or as the context. And we're going to then actually pass in so splice takes in a start value, a delete count, and then new values, right? So our start value is going to be 3, right? Because we wanted to do it after the 3. And then our delete count is going to be 0. So this all has to be an array. And then our actual value here is going to be all of these values spread out, right? So it's going to be the spread operator, basically all these values basically pulled out, right? So what we want to do is we want to say 0.3 dot concat R2. So we concatenate this array to our start index and our delete count, and we're now going to actually get the value of 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 4, 5. And let's go ahead and log R1. So we have 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 4, 5, right? Now if we wanted to actually delete a value, if we wanted to delete the 4, let's say, we could change this right here. All right, now we have 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 5, right? If we wanted to get rid of that and we just wanted to be 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, again, we could put a 2 in here. And I think you guys kind of get the point here. It is a significantly easier way to kind of merge two arrays, do some sort of intersect value, especially if you're not just putting this at the end of this. Obviously, if it was at the end of it, you can concatenate it. If it was at the beginning of it, you can concatenate this one to this one. So this is more about kind of merging in the middle. Splice function does a very good job of that when combined with the apply itself, right? So again, that's kind of all I have for you today in terms of, bind, call, and apply. If there's any other examples or any other reasons or any other things that you want to know about the functions, feel free to put them in the comments, and we would love to continue down this road because there's definitely some more advanced stuff you could do here. But for now, this is all we're going to get into. All right, so hope you guys all enjoyed that and hope you at least learned a little bit of something today, or at least had fun trying it out. If you guys want to learn any more about bind, call, and apply, or if you have any other specific questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Like I said, this can get more advanced. If you think about it, bind actually returns a function, so you can actually do a .bind.apply as well, and bind itself is a function. So you can actually call bind the function, or you can just call and apply on the bind function itself. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do as far as that goes. If you haven't subscribed, feel free to hit the subscribe button below, because we're trying to pump out more and more content, and we would love additional suggestions from you guys. So we love you. We'll see you soon. Until next time, take it easy.